Deep in the American Southwest, Carlsbad Caverns and Guadalupe Mountains National Parks protect a labyrinthine landscape which defies description. Here is a land you must experience. Here is a land you must see for yourself. At first glance, the towering ridges of the Guadalupe seem far removed from the limestone chambers of Carlsbad Caverns. But the mountains and the caverns share a common geologic heritage. More than 250 million years ago, much of the American Southwest was covered by a vast sea. Around its shores, between wide, mud-washed tidal flats and the deeper seabed, a great reef slowly formed, built up by soils eroded from land above and lime deposits from the skeletons of tiny marine organisms. About 10 to 12 million years ago, all of the land, including the reef, began to be uplifted. While nature's erosive arsenal of wind, water, frost, and dust attacked the exposed layers of the reef, groundwater charged with hydrogen sulfide gas formed sulfuric acid, which began to dissolve portions of the underground limestone. So it is that some of the chapters of this special story are exposed in the blazing southwest sun high on Guadalupe Peak and El Capitan, while others are hidden deep in the dark, humid confines of the caverns of Carlsbad. In addition to geologic marvels, the Guadalupe Mountains are home to a vibrant and diverse ecosystem of flora and fauna. In 5,000 vertical feet, one can travel from the Lechuguilla and creosote bushes of the Chihuahuan Desert to the ponderosa pines and Douglas firs of the highest peaks. And just as Yellowstone has its bears, Carlsbad Caverns has its bats, more than 1 million of them. The story of Carlsbad Caverns and the Guadalupe Mountains is also one of ongoing exploration, from the fossil records of the ancient Permian Sea to the mysteries of Lechuguilla Cave. Once thought to be only a shallow hole, a breakthrough in 1986 showed Lechuguilla Cave to be a gigantic maze whose unexplored farthest reaches may dwarf the known caverns of Carlsbad. Will Rogers called Carlsbad Caverns the Grand Canyon with a roof on it. He should have seen Lechuguilla. Yes, this is a special place. One either abhors the desert or is reborn by it. Even the plants here live for that rebirth. Many spend their lifetimes storing precious water for that one special year during which they will flower and scatter the seeds of their renewal. The desert heightens one's senses and makes the rebirth all that more powerful. It is felt in the glowing sunsets that paint the western horizon, in the beating of millions of wings as the bat flight spirals into the night sky, and in the slow but steady trickle by which a stalactite grows. Come with us and heighten your senses. Come with us and be renewed. Come learn the story of Carlsbad Caverns and the Guadalupe Mountains and share the spirit of this so rugged, so beautiful a land.
Black-chinned hummingbird. The black-chinned hummingbird winters in the warmer climate of Mexico, but nests in the parks on semi-wooded canyon slopes. The male has a black throat above a conspicuous white collar, differentiating it from ruby-throated hummingbirds. Females are greenish above and whitish below, quite similar to the female ruby-throat. Worldwide, there are 319 species of hummingbirds, 15 of which can be found in the American West. Brown towhee, canyon towhee. This dull gray-brown bird with a moderately long dark tail resembles a very plain overgrown sparrow. In the Southwest, the grayer forms of the species are commonly known as canyon towhees. Canyon towhees can be distinguished from true brown towhees of the Pacific coast by their rufous crown and pale color. They nest in brushy areas, canyons, and pinyon juniper forests. Great horned owl. If you are lucky enough to see one in the daylight, there is no mistaking the great horned owl. Larger than other North American owls, great horned owls have ear tufts or horns above large eyes and a conspicuous white throat collar. You are more likely to hear them at night, giving a series of 3 to 8 hoots. Great horned owls are found throughout the Western Hemisphere in forests, thickets, deserts, canyons, and open country. Ladder-backed woodpecker. Ladder-backed woodpeckers are the most common woodpecker found in the Guadalupes. If it's in the desert and it has a black and white striped face and a black and white striped back, it must be a ladder-backed. Males have red caps. Hairy and downy woodpeckers have vertical white patches on their backs instead of the ladder. Their habitat is deserts, canyons, cottonwoods, and arid brush, where they nest in holes in trees, posts, yucca, and agave. Mountain chickadee. Chickadees are small, plump birds that often roam in little clusters and appear quite acrobatic when feeding on insects. Both male and female mountain chickadees are similar in coloration to the familiar black-capped chickadee, but the mountain chickadee's black cap is interrupted by a white line over each eye. Its song is 3 high, clear, whistled notes, with the first note being the highest. Mountain chickadees nest in tree cavities in mountain forests and winter in lower elevations. Mourning dove. Mourning doves are the most widespread wild dove in the West. It is generally brown with a pointed tail bordered with large white spots. Most distinctive is its mournful cooing call. At a distance, only 3 coos are audible. Mourning doves are found throughout the West and in many different habitats: farmlands, open woods, mesquite, grassland, and desert. Northern mockingbird. Listen to the mockingbird, and you will likely hear it repeat itself. The mockingbird rapidly repeats each phrase of notes, often a half-dozen times or more, before going on to the next. Its entire song is a long succession of phrases of great variety. Mockingbirds are smaller than robins, with long, slender tails and large white patches on their wings and tail, which are conspicuous in flight. Their habitat is brush along the roadside, mesquite, and desert stream sides. Peregrine falcon. With sharp eyes and a body built for speed, the peregrine falcon is a formidable bird of prey. Its diet consists of doves, pigeons, other small birds, bats, and rodents. Reaching speeds of 200 miles per hour in a dive, the peregrine falcon is one of the fastest birds in the world. Peregrines winter in Mexico and return to the Guadalupes to nest on rocky ledges high on the canyon cliffs. Rufous-crowned sparrow. The rufous-crowned sparrow has a distinguishing black whisker at its throat and, of course, its rufous cap. Its habitat is on rocky slopes with sparse low bushes or in open areas of pine and oak forests. Its nest is usually a grass-lined cup on the ground. Rufous-sided towhee. The rufous-sided towhee is smaller and more slender than a robin and does indeed have rufous-colored sides. Males have black heads and necks and rows of white spots on their backs and wings. Females are dusky brown where the male is black. It eats insects, seeds, and berries, and nests in shrubs, forest edges, and undergrowth. Turkey vulture. The turkey vulture is usually seen soaring in the sky or sometimes perched in dead trees or on fence posts. This is a huge bird, generally black in color, whose wingspan is about 6 feet. While about the same size as eagles, turkey vultures can be identified by their different soaring techniques. Vultures soar with their wings pointed slightly up at the wingtips. Eagles soar with their wings flat. Vultures also rock and tilt unsteadily in flight. Western meadowlark. As its name implies, the western meadowlark is found in open fields, meadows, plains, and prairies. It is recognized by a conspicuous patch of white on each side of its short, wide tail and by its bright yellow breast and throat, which is crossed by a black V. The meadowlark nervously flicks its tail open and shut when walking on the ground. The eastern meadowlark is very similar and is also found in the parks, but even experts have a tough time telling the difference between the two species. Century plant, or mezcal. The century plant, or mezcal, is an easily recognized agave which grows on rocky slopes and hillsides in the desert foothills. Its leathery blue-green leaves are tipped with dark spines. After 15 or so years, not 100 years as the name implies, a flower stalk 8 to 15 feet high rises from the middle of the plant, and the clusters of red buds and yellow flowers attract many nectar-loving species. Once the seeds ripen, the plant dies. Faxon yucca. The Faxon yucca is sometimes called Spanish dagger or Spanish bayonet. It grows up to 40 feet tall in the high desert plateau of West Texas. This yucca's leaves can be up to 4 feet long with dense heads 5 to 7 feet in diameter. Its bark is reddish-brown and often covered with dead curled leaves. In spring, white flowers appear in dense clusters, usually partially hidden by the leaves. Lechuguilla. Lechuguilla grows in extensive colonies below 4,500 feet in the Chihuahuan Desert. Its leaves form a rosette of yellow to gray-green, spine-tipped daggers. Like all agaves, the plant requires many years to store sufficient food for production of its 10-foot flower stalk. The leafless stalk supports pale yellow flowers in narrow spine-like clusters. 3-celled fruits ripen and produce tiny, flat, black, shiny seeds. Soon after this, the lechuguilla dies. Nolina. Nolina is sometimes called bear grass or basket grass because Indians used its leaves when weaving baskets, mats, and other items. It grows in exposed locations on rocky slopes above 3,000 feet. Nolina looks like a huge clump of long-bladed grass, with flexible, narrow leaves up to 3 feet long with finely serrated margins. A plume-like cluster of white flowers grows out of the leaves. The Nolina's 3-lobed fruit capsules are papery and dry-winged, remaining on the stalk until late fall. Ocotillo. Sometimes called coach whip or Jacob's staff, Ocotillo is found on rocky hillsides below 5,000 feet. It has clumps of long, thorny, branched stems that grow upward from a central crown. These appear dead during the dry season, but after a good rain, tiny leaves cover the thorny stems and last until it is dry again. Bright red tubular blossoms appear in dense clusters at the tips of the stems. With the lack of wood, early settlers used the thorny stems of the Ocotillo to create living fences and animal pens. Prickly pear. The prickly pear is a widespread and easily recognizable cactus of the Southwest. It has flattened greenish pads that look more like ears than pears and that vary in size and manner of growth. Spines and tiny barbed hairs, typically white or gray with dark tips, are numerous and let you know if you've gotten too close. Flowers are large and spectacular, usually yellow with many petals. There are 10 varieties of prickly pear cactus in Carlsbad and Guadalupe. Soap tree yucca. The soap tree yucca is the state flower of New Mexico and the most common yucca in the Carlsbad Guadalupe area. Its trunk has many branches and each terminates in a clump of narrow spine-tipped leaves. A cluster of white bell-shaped flowers grows on a tall stalk above the leaves. If the yucca moth fertilizes the flower, a dry capsule eventually develops with paper-thin seeds. Walking stick cholla. The walking stick cholla is a branching, jointed cactus 5 to 6 feet in height, found in desert scrub and hillsides. The joints are usually green, up to 12 inches long, and covered with cream or brown spines. This cholla's showy magenta flowers are 2 inches wide. When the walking stick cholla dies, hollow woody cores remain, with diamond-shaped holes where the spines once were. This skeleton is often made into walking sticks. Black bear. Once widespread throughout the Guadalupe Mountains, the black bear is now extremely rare and infrequently reported. Black bears range from a deep, shiny black to brown or cinnamon in color. They are very adaptable and, while omnivores, their diet consists mainly of plants and insects. Unlike their cousin, the grizzly, black bears climb trees readily. Except for adult females with cubs, black bears are usually loners, preferring to remain solitary. Coyote. Coyotes are bold and inquisitive mammals, and their daily wanderings may take them many miles. You may be lucky enough to see one trotting across a hillside or arroyo, but more likely you will hear a pack of them howling at dusk or on moonlit nights. Coyotes are highly adaptive carnivores, consuming virtually anything. Their diet consists of small rodents and birds, supplemented with deer carrion. Coyotes are found throughout the West in almost every kind of habitat, from high alpine to desert to city suburbs. Elk. Elk are occasionally seen in the higher Guadalupe Mountains, particularly the less traveled western regions. A local subspecies, Merriam's elk, became extinct about 1900. In 1929, J.C. Hunter, owner of the Guadalupe Mountains Ranch, imported 44 Rocky Mountain elk into McKittrick Canyon. When the canyons are ablaze with fall colors, crisp autumn air is occasionally punctuated by the haunting bugle of a bull elk. Gray fox. The gray fox is very common and widespread throughout Carlsbad and the Guadalupe Mountains. The species is found in a wide variety of habitats, but is most frequently encountered at night by driving the Walnut Canyon Road in Carlsbad. The gray fox is the only member of the dog family that can climb trees by using its claws. Mountain lion. Mountain lions are known in different parts of the country by different names, including cougar, puma, and panther. Lions usually depend on a large deer population, and the growing deer population in Carlsbad and Guadalupe national parks may be one reason that the mountain lion population here is on the increase. Mountain lions are mostly solitary and prefer rocky cliffs and ledges that provide cover for stalking their prey. Mountain lions are nocturnal and seldom seen. Mule deer. One has only to look at the shape of its ears to understand how the mule deer got its name. Males shed their antlers each January or February, and the antlers become a food source for a variety of rodents. Mule deer are most active in the early morning or evening hours, usually seeking shade during the heat of the day. They are quite gregarious, often feeding and traveling in groups. When frightened, they form a tight group or flee in a single line, depending on terrain. Raccoon. Generally nocturnal creatures, raccoons may be seen on park roads at night and in the evening at the bat flight program. Raccoons are omnivorous and quite opportunistic in their feeding habits. They go into a period of torpor about the first permanent snowfall, although warm periods during the winter may bring them out to forage a midwinter snack. Watch for their tracks near puddles and pools along the trails. Rock squirrel. Rock squirrels are found in the appropriate habitat that their name suggests, rocky cliffs and canyons. They are easily found around the entrance to Carlsbad Cavern in summer when they feed on the fruit of the prickly pear cactus. Couch's spadefoot toad. This amphibian is a super survivalist. It lives buried several feet below the surface until rains of summer. Then it comes to the surface to mate and search for food. Females lay eggs, and the eggs hatch and become tadpoles, all in 7 to 10 days. This rapid cycle permits the species to reproduce before the pools of water have dried up. Adults can eat enough in a couple of nights to last a couple of years. When the ground begins to dry, adults burrow into the soil and become dormant again until the next wet season. Collared lizard. The collared lizard can be quite large, sometimes growing to 12 inches in length. It likes open, sparse grasslands with ample boulder piles for basking in the sun and in which to seek refuge. The collared lizard runs on its hind legs when escaping or attacking its prey. As a predator, it eats other lizards and insects and is quite territorial. The collared lizard is diurnal, which means it is active during the day. Mountain short-horned lizard. This colorful species of lizard relies on its camouflage for protection. It eats mainly ants and gives birth to live young. It is usually found at higher elevations, among mountain shrubs and oak and pine forests. In Texas, mountain short-horned lizards are found only in the Guadalupe and Davis Mountains. This lizard is able to increase the blood pressure in its head and squirt blood from its eyes as an added defense. Chihuahuan spotted whiptail. Like its name implies, Chihuahuan spotted whiptails are lightning-fast runners and are constantly on the move, digging for invertebrate prey. They are out during the warmest months, but hibernate or estivate, remain very sluggish during most of the year. This species is what is known as a parthenoform, an all-female species developed as a hybrid from a mating between two other species. One hybrid female can start an entire population, and all offspring are females and clones of the founding female. Coachwhip. This large reddish snake may grow in excess of 6 feet in length. It is the fastest serpent in North America and is active in the heat of the day. Its speed permits it to hunt by sight for lizards, snakes, birds, rodents, insects, bats, and carrion. The yellow lens and cornea of its eyes are thought to protect the retina from excess ultraviolet light. Coach whips avoid dense vegetation and prefer the open desert. Whipsnake. The whipsnake is extremely fast, but it is more delicate than the coach whip, so it stays in brushy zones and canyons. It can climb and travel through trees with astonishing speed. The whipsnake eats lizards, birds, rodents, and insects, and hunts with its head held high above the ground, watching for movement. Its slender form allows it to penetrate thorny thickets in habitats ranging from desert lowlands to the bowl. Bull snake. The bull snake is seen most often in the parks due to its large size, up to 8 feet in length. It is a powerful constrictor and eats anything from frog eggs to rabbits, but it prefers rodents. The bull snake climbs, digs, crawls, and swims, and will hiss loudly and defend itself by biting aggressively if attacked. The pine snake in the east and the gopher snake in the west are the same species as the bull snake. Western diamondback rattlesnake. This common pit viper has a long erectable pair of front fangs which swing out and inject deadly venom all in one lightning move. It has a heat-sensitive loreal pit between each eye and nostril, which allows it to detect warm-blooded prey with incredible sensitivity to changes in temperature, less than 1/100th of a degree. It can strike accurately in total darkness without need of vision or the use of its tongue. Western diamondbacks grow up to 6 feet in length and add a new segment to the rattle each time they shed skin, up to 2 or 3 times per year. They can be very aggressive if disturbed and are potentially lethal. Nocturnal and diurnal, they are frequently seen on the McKittrick Canyon Road and along US 62-180. Black-tailed rattlesnake. The black-tailed rattlesnake is the most common rattlesnake in the parks. It is both diurnal and nocturnal, and it prefers rocky terrain in canyons up to 8,000 feet. It is fairly docile, at least when compared to the western diamondback, but like all rattlesnakes, it has a very poisonous venom. It is distinguished by its black tail above the rattle. The western diamondback has white and black rings on its tail above the rattle. Apache plume. Apache plume is a scraggly, clump-forming shrub found in rocky or sandy soils along roadsides, canyons, and arroyos between 4,000 and 8,000 feet. Its small, wedge-shaped leaves are divided into 3 to 7 blunt-tipped lobes. Conspicuous white flowers are present all summer. The fruit grow in feathery balls, often tinged with red or pink, reminding some of an Indian feather bonnet, hence the common name, Apache plume. Big-tooth maple. Maple trees are among the most distinctive trees in North America. 12 species are native to the United States, including the big-tooth maple, which grows in moist soils in the canyons and mountains of Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. The bark of the big-tooth maple is gray to light brown and can be either smooth or scaly. Its leaves are typically 2 to 3 inches in diameter with 3 broad, blunt lobes. They turn brilliant reds and yellows during the fall and provide for colorful vistas up and down the canyons. Chinkapin oak. The chinkapin oak is far more common in the hardwood forests of the east than the desert mountains. Indeed, the Guadalupes mark the most westerly growth of this species. The tree may grow as tall as 80 feet and is usually found in dry, rocky soils along canyon bottoms. Its leaves are lance-shaped and up to 6 inches long, with wavy edges and coarse teeth. Acorns are small and half enclosed in a cap. All oaks provide edible leaves and fruit for wildlife. Douglas fir. Named after botanist David Douglas, The Douglas fir is a member of the pine family. Douglas firs grow throughout the West, reaching heights of over 200 feet in the moist Pacific Northwest, but rarely exceeding 130 feet in the dry Southwest. Single flat needles are slightly longer than an inch and blunt on the end. Reddish-brown oblong cones appear in August or September and hang down from the branches like pendants. Gray oak. The gray oak grows in dry, rocky sites at elevations between 4,500 and 7,800 feet. Its leaves are small and oval, usually smooth-margined, but occasionally toothed. Their color is dusty blue-gray, hence the name. The leaves turn brown in the fall and stay on the twigs until new leaves emerge in the spring. There are 7 species of oak in the Guadalupe Mountains, of which chinkapin and gray oak are the most distinctive. Honey mesquite. Honey mesquite is a common and widespread desert shrub or tree usually found below 5,000 feet along streams and arroyos. Root systems can penetrate soil to a depth of 60 feet in search of water. Mesquite branches have sturdy, straight thorns which pack a mean punch. The fruits hang like string beans from the branches and ripen in the fall. Cattle eat the beans and contribute to its spreading. Mesquite wood makes for tasty barbecuing. Juniper. 4 species of junipers grow in the Carlsbad Guadalupe area. Junipers have short, scale-like needles and grow in dry, rocky soils in the foothills or lower mountains. Seeds are borne in scaled cones, and the scales eventually grow together to form a berry-like structure. Cones may be blue or red, depending on the species. The largest alligator juniper in Texas is located in Guadalupe Mountains National Park. Mexican orange. Mexican orange is an aromatic evergreen shrub of the canyons and hillsides that grows between 3,000 and 7,000 feet. The leaves have 5 to 10 narrow, coarsely toothed leaflets. Flowers are solitary or in small clusters with 5 white petals. Young twigs are green and hairy, becoming gray and white with age. This shrub is a member of the citrus family, but its fruits are not edible. Mountain mahogany. Mountain mahogany is a slender-stemmed shrub found in dry, rocky areas at elevations above 3,000 feet. Simple oval leaves are about 1 inch long, with distinct veins and coarse-toothed margins. The tiny flowers lack petals, but the sepals form a greenish tube that holds the many stamens. In the fall, fuzzy spiral tails 1 to 3 inches long are found on the small seeds. Pinyon pine. The pinyon pine is the state tree of New Mexico. It grows between 5,000 and 7,000 feet, often mixed with junipers and shrubby oaks. Normally, this reddish-barked tree is small and many-branched, with leaves or needles clustered in bundles of 2 or 3 about 1 inch long. The cones are about 2 inches long and contain wingless edible seeds which are relished by humans and animals alike. Ponderosa pine. The venerable ponderosa pine is as much a sign of the Mountain West as maples and birches are of the East. The ponderosa is typically found above 6,000 feet. Its needles grow in clusters of 2 or 3 and are about 5 inches long. Immature cones are green and tightly closed, changing to reddish-brown and opening as they ripen. Winged seeds are released from the cones and become part of the diet of numerous rodents. Southwestern chokeberry. The southwestern chokeberry is found in canyon bottoms. It grows to a height of 30 feet and has smooth, dark bark with reddish-brown twigs. Its leaves are stalked and oval-shaped, with a pointed base and tip, and finely toothed margins. Tiny white flowers appear in clusters on short branches of the current year's growth. The small, purplish-black fruits are eaten by wildlife and often make their way into jellies and brandies. Texas madrone. The Texas madrone is found on rocky slopes or canyon walls in the desert mountains of southeastern New Mexico and West Texas, between 4,500 and 6,500 feet. The tree grows to 20 to 30 feet with a crooked and gnarly trunk. The smooth reddish bark peels with age, revealing younger white or pink bark. Pink or white urn-shaped flowers grow in clusters at the end of the branches. The bright red fruit that looks like little apples gives the tree its local name, manzanita.
The efforts of cavers from around the world who come to the Guadalupes in search of discovery have paid off enormously in the past few years. Back in the 1940s, Lechuguilla Cave was nothing but a pit with some guano at the bottom, known for its 90-foot drop and some undecorated, nondescript passage. But in 1986, a group of cavers drawn by the wind whistling through the rocks and debris on the floor of the pit, after many failed attempts, dug down deep into just the right spot, and one of the world's great caves was discovered. To keep the loose rock from caving in on the original dig, a culvert was installed, with an environmental gate so that increased airflow from the new entrance would not cause drying in the cave. Lechuguilla Cave has become one of the great discoveries in the history of caving. Because it is overlain by the Yates Formation, the cave has been relatively protected from the cleansing effects of flowing water from above. Gypsum, which is a byproduct of the reaction between sulfuric acid and limestone, is still in place. Its discovery supports the theory that sulfuric acid was the agent that caused the great voids of the Guadalupes. In the chandelier ballroom, the ceiling is covered with gypsum, a great confluence of the snow-white mineral which ends in the creation of huge crystal chandeliers up to 20 feet long. The gypsum takes other forms as well. Delicate flowers as big as a thumbnail are extruded under pressure or form intricate bouquets. Crystalline gypsum hairs up to 30 feet long hang floor to ceiling in a room called Darktown. And sometimes, in the convective currents of airflow in the cave, weave themselves into delicate ornaments. Lechuguilla Cave is a discovery that took considerable faith and effort in an obscure corner of the park. Ogle Cave is on the eastern side of Slaughter Canyon. It is a short but spectacular cave with a very large main room containing huge columns and draperies. In fact, at 107 feet, the bicentennial column was once thought to be the world's tallest. But that distinction now goes to a speleothem in China, just 2 feet taller. Ogle was mined for bat guano in an era when caves were poorly regarded and cave conservation unheard of. Guano miners thought nothing of dynamiting a path through a forest of massive columns. They blew a hole right through a wall of speleothems to run a cable for a trolley to move guano from deeper parts of the room. Luckily, they bypassed Ogle's most spectacular feature, a wall of draperies nearly 80 feet high, formed at a time when calcite-rich waters must have poured out of a joint or fracture in the relatively flat ceiling. Now the cave is mostly dry. The massive speleothems have long since stopped growing. But off the main room, a breach in the sandstone layer above channels calcite-rich waters into an alcove where a small group of glistening speleothems continues to grow. Just beyond is a man-made passage miners began in 1915, intending to tunnel out the side of the mountain to avoid having to haul guano up the cave's 180-foot entrance pit. It was never completed. Much of the mining equipment used in the cave is still in place, now considered artifacts of a bygone era when men using crude lanterns shoveled tons of dusty guano into burlap sacks. Walls of bat guano remain, although the bats have long since abandoned the cave.
Yeah, I was looking at that earlier. They're taking water down.
The havoc wreaked on the cave by the mining operations is irreparable.
Really, perfect.
But local cavers, under the supervision of the park, are doing minor restoration, piecing together some of the smaller speleothems in the dry portion of the cave. But without the flow of calcite-rich waters that formed the massive speleothems of Ogle Cave, the only reclamation the cave itself can accomplish is very subtle. Since 1915, this little drapery has been growing at the entrance to the man-made tunnel that was never finished. It is barely an inch long. Ogle Cave is on the eastern side of Slaughter Canyon. It is a short but spectacular cave with a very large main room containing huge columns and draperies. In fact, at 107 feet, the bicentennial column was once thought to be the world's tallest. But that distinction now goes to a speleothem in China, just 2 feet taller. Ogle was mined for bat guano in an era when caves were poorly regarded. About 10 miles southwest of Carlsbad Cavern, a group of visitors climb up the sloping west wall of Slaughter Canyon. The half-mile trail ascends 500 vertical feet. Led by park interpretive rangers, the group will explore Slaughter Canyon Cave. The rangers light kerosene lanterns, and the group proceeds through the area known as the Twilight Zone. Light from the entrance still penetrates the darkness that will soon be, as it is in all caves, total. Slaughter Canyon Cave is a first trip into the world of caving for most people. Here you bring your own light. The passages are unimproved. The cave is a historical site left much as it was when guano mining was abandoned here in the 1950s.
Remember I promised you're going to be over your head in guano. You're now in the pits.
50,000 tons of bat guano were removed from the cave in 2 decades. The steep walls of this guano pile reveal the bones of countless generations of Mexican free-tailed bats that inhabited the cave. Some are the bones of a similar but now extinct species called the Constantine free-tail that lived 17,000 years ago.
The scientists, and they believe that it could be about 17,000 years ago. And the guano layer still goes underneath us.
Oh, it's still deeper.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's still deeper than this.
But guano mining artifacts are not the only evidence that man has entered this cave. Deep into the dark zone, perhaps 6,000 to 12,000 years before the electric light was invented, ancient people used this cave for shelter and as a source of water. Slaughter Canyon Cave has one of the 2 oldest known examples of deep cave art in North America, and the only one in a national park. There are at least 50 figures here in an alcove with a small pool of water nearby. The actual drawings appear as pale yellow stains. Experts believe the figures to be archaic, drawn by the hunter-gatherer tribes who roamed the Guadalupe Mountains long before the Apaches arrived in the late 1400s. The black charcoal lines are a crude attempt by someone, possibly one of the miners, to outline the figures. Clues in the form of artifacts have been found in other parts of the cave, suggesting that the cave was well explored long before Western man came on the scene. The trail winds 1 1/4 miles through the main passage of the cave, sometimes requiring the use of hand lines up and down modest slopes.
It washed away as it rolled over. Different theories. The other, if you see this formation, remember we talked about the sparkles on it? Yeah. The flat, what does it look like? It's like a ridge.
It is a first taste of wild caving for most people, and the cave rewards the effort.
Well, the name of this formation is the Chinese Wall.
On a hot summer day, a group of visitors makes its way down a small canyon just off the scenic loop road. In the wash below is a cave that is for many the first real test of their spirit to explore underground.
Sometimes it's hard to get people into the entrance of Spider Cave and other tight areas that I sometimes take people, and some of the chimneys can be tough too. But I think myself and the other rangers that lead these trips kind of almost take a little bit of strange pride that we can talk people into anything.
Spider Cave is what cavers call a crawly little cave by Guadalupe standards. In the summer, rangers lead occasional tours to the cave for those yearning for a taste of real cave exploration. Though the passages seen on the tour are well mapped, and the ranger guides are all experienced cavers, this tour requires a certain level of fitness, and applicants are screened before being allowed to participate. Much of the cave is formed in the Yates Formation, one layer of the reef that contains silts and clays deposited over the reef late in its development. The Yates gives the cave its red cast. It also contacts the Tansa layer, which shows up in the white dolomite walls in some rooms.
It's a lot of crawling, but for me, that's what Spider is. It's not necessarily a cave where you can walk into a big open room and marvel at it. It's something to experience on a much more immediate level. Crawling through it, getting dirty, wearing the cave on your shirt, in your hair, in your ears, and everywhere else. And that's what Spider is. It's a very involved caving trip, and that's why I think people like it, and that's why I like this cave a lot.
James Larkin White and the Early Explorations. While there is ample evidence that prehistoric peoples explored the natural entrance area of Carlsbad Cavern centuries ago, and that ranchers may have known of the natural entrance in the 1880s, the man most identified with the most extensive early exploration of Carlsbad Cavern was a cowboy named James Larkin White. Jim White was born in Mason County, Texas in 1882. When he was 10, his father, Larkin White, moved the family to Lone Tree, New Mexico, a tiny ranching hamlet about 8 miles east of Carlsbad. Jim gave up school after a spotty fourth-grade education and started riding range for the Lucas brothers, John and Dan, on their Triple X ranch, parts of which were only about 3 miles from the natural entrance. Around the turn of the century, it may have been 1901 or perhaps as early as 1898, the exact date is not clear, Jim White camped near the natural entrance with a fence-building crew from the ranch. He never explained how he happened to be alone, but he witnessed a dark funnel-shaped cloud rising out of the ground and into the hazy clouds. On closer inspection, it turned out to be an enormous flight of bats flying into the evening sky from the natural entrance. Jim White was a self-reliant ranch hand who rarely had much to say. For some reason, he did not mention the encounter to his companions, but instead returned several days later and fashioned a crude ladder out of fence wire and tree limbs. Then, armed with a kerosene lantern, he began to descend into the hole. Visitors who descend into the natural entrance today will recognize the description of what happened next, as it was written in 1930 by White's ghostwriter, Frank Nicholson. Finally, I reached a chamber, an immense aperture, oval-shaped and extending several hundred yards to where it curved off sharply to the right and began a sharp descent. Toward the left was another immense tunnel leading in the opposite direction. The floor of the latter appeared to be more level and somewhat smooth, so I tackled it first. This proved to be the Bat Cave, and after exploring about in it, I retraced my steps and started down the other tunnel. The exact dates of White's subsequent explorations are vague, but it is known for certain that on March 28, 1903, Abijah Long, a jack-of-all-trades from Carlsbad, filed a placer mining claim in the Eddy County Courthouse, proposing to remove valuable deposits of guano, clay, and other kindred substances from what he called Big Cave. Jim White's relationship with Abijah Long appears to have been strained, at least in the 1930s, when Long claimed to be the discoverer of Carlsbad Cavern. But in the early years, Jim White worked for Long and other guano mining operations and continued to explore the main passages of the cave, naming many of the features. White became an advocate for the caverns, encouraging those who were interested, very few were, to accompany him on a tour. There wasn't much interest in the beauty of Carlsbad Cavern until White led a photographer named Ray Davis through what locals still referred to as the Old Bat Cave. The Davis photographs attracted interest in Carlsbad, and locals organized what might be called the cavern's first scheduled sightseeing party. White's wife, Fanny, fed the group, and Jim lowered them two at a time down the bucket at the guano shaft. After the trip on September 15, 1922, local newspaper editor Luke Perry wrote, "Carlsbad has one of the wonders of the world at her very doorstep, but does not realize it." Perry's words started the town talking and attracted the attention of Commissioner William Spry of the General Land Office. Spry soon initiated an investigation to determine if the cave was worthy of status as a national monument. Mineral examiner Robert A. Holly was assigned to the task, and his report was glowing. "I enter upon this task with a feeling of temerity, as I am wholly conscious of the feebleness of my efforts to convey in words the deep conflicting emotions, the feeling of fear and awe, and the desire for an inspired understanding of the divine Creator's work that presents to the human eye such a complex aggregate of natural wonders in such a limited space." On October 25, 1923, President Calvin Coolidge signed a proclamation creating Carlsbad Cave National Monument with park boundaries surrounding only 719.22 acres. Several months later, in January 1924, Jim White ran an ad in the Carlsbad newspaper. Bat Cave Guide. Sightseers wishing a guide for exploring the California Bat Cave will find me at the caves or Weaver's Garage while in Carlsbad. I charge $2 per person per day when not less than 5 in the party. Single person, $10. For dates, write to see Jim White, Carlsbad, New Mexico. A month later, he ran a similar ad, but changed the wording from California Bat Cave, a reference to long-standing business connections to fertilizer operations, to Carlsbad Caves. A January 1925 National Geographic article featuring the photographs of Ray Davis was entitled, "A Visit to Carlsbad Cavern, New Mexico." The tourist rush was about to begin. Jim White ran the National Park Service guide operations in the cave and then served as chief ranger of the monument, but declining health and a lack of the education required for the job forced him to resign. Beginning in 1936 and for years afterward, White sold and autographed copies of Jim White's Own Story as told to ghostwriter Frank Ernest Nicholson in the underground lunchroom. The explorer of Carlsbad Cavern died on April 28, 1946. Today, a bronze plaque hangs in the visitor center lobby which sums it up best. James L. White, 1882 to 1946. Beginning in 1901, Jim White made the first known extensive explorations of the Carlsbad Caverns. He was chiefly responsible for bringing the attention of the public, scientific groups, and the federal government of the importance and significance of the caverns. Quiet Jim White said it a little differently. When asked about his explorations of the cave, his response was, "We never bit off more than we could chaw." Mining for guano. It was Abijah Long who initiated the guano mining operations in Bat Cave. Long chanced upon the natural entrance about 1903, and on a second visit into the hole with companions Jake Lynn and Andy Fairchild, they noticed a pervasive acrid smell. "Animal of some kind," was Lynn's comment. Soon they came upon huge mounds of a musty material they realized was not a natural feature of the cave. Above, the ceiling formed a large dome from which sparkled thousands of tiny pinpoints of light reflecting from the light of their single lantern. They began to hear squeaks that rose in crescendo as they moved on. Then it dawned on them. "Bats!" Abijah Long exclaimed. "Millions of them!" The mounds were, of course, bat dung, guano, thousands and thousands of tons of it. Bat guano is high in nitrate and makes a rich fertilizer. Long and his companions filled 4 sacks as samples and promptly returned to Carlsbad. Chemical tests of the guano sample showed it had commercial potential, and on March 28, 1903, Long, attested by Fairchild and Lynn, filed the Big Cave mining claim on the site and set about the tough task of removing the guano economically. Long chanced upon Victor Queen, a cowboy with mining experience in Mexico, and Queen suggested that Long sink a shaft from the surface directly over the deposit and eliminate the long underground haul. Long was skeptical, but by late 1903, a headframe with rope, pulley, and a big iron bucket was operating over the shaft. This bucket, which played so important a role in the history of the cave, was surprisingly small. Manufactured by the Derbyshire Harvey Iron and Machine Company of El Paso, it was of heavy iron, riveted at the seams. Originally clean and shiny, the bucket soon rusted and became thickly coated with guano. The opening was only 21.5 inches wide. The sides bulged out to a width of 25 inches, and the bottom was only 18.25 inches across. The bale was of 1-inch steel rod, arching to 13.5 inches above the rim of the bucket. Ordinarily, 2 people rode in it for balance in a half-crouched position. The demand for bat guano by the growing California fruit industry was high, but the costs of extracting the guano, hauling it to drying racks in Carlsbad, drying it to reduce shipping weight, and then shipping it in sacks to California, made the operation unprofitable. Abijah Long sold his interests in 1906, and while operations continued in Carlsbad Cavern and Slaughter Canyon Cave, Ogle Cave, and Misery Pit well into the century, no one ever became rich mining Carlsbad's guano. Regrettably, the guano mining operations caused irreparable damage to the natural features of Carlsbad Cavern, but the passages that were dug and the artifacts that were left behind have become a part of the history of Carlsbad Cavern. Colonel Tom Bowles. If Jim White was the man who put Carlsbad Cavern on the map, then Thomas Bowles was the man who turned it into a first-class national park. Tom Bowles was born in Dardanelle, Arkansas in 1881. He grew up in Fort Smith, Arkansas, and became a civil engineer at the Missouri School of Mines. Although never in the military, Bowles was addressed as colonel after an honorary appointment as such by the governor of New Mexico early in his tenure at Carlsbad Cavern. Highly respected Stephen Mather, the Park Service's first director, convinced the colonel to become superintendent of Carlsbad Cave National Monument in May of 1927. Bowles was just the dynamic manager the fledgling monument needed to promote the protection of the cave's resources and develop surface and underground visitor facilities. First and foremost, Bowles was a promoter at a time when the National Park Service needed to attract both public and governmental support. Bowles negotiated promotions with the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and even convinced the U.S. House of Representatives Appropriations Subcommittee on National Parks to meet in Lower Cave. As more visitors arrived, he oversaw the formation of the Cavern Supply Company to provide food services, which included the 1928 construction of the lunchroom, 750 feet underground. When lunchroom employees suggested building a small supply elevator, Bowles took the idea a step further, an 18-inch wide elevator that could transport visitors in emergencies. New Mexico Governor Arthur Seligman, who had once helped rescue a rotund visitor from the depths of the cave, then suggested full-size elevators, and in November of 1931, 2 10-person capacity elevators began operating in a 750-foot elevator shaft. Bowles was also responsible for initiating the famous Rock of Ages ceremony in 1928 and the Bat Flight program in 1929. On May 14, 1930, President Herbert Hoover signed into law a bill establishing Carlsbad Caverns National Park. Through the Great Depression, Bowles kept up his efforts to publicize and improve the park, and on February 3, 1939, President Franklin Roosevelt signed legislation adding 39,000 acres to the park. During World War II, the colonel took particular pride in offering free passes to American service personnel. Of his 19-year tenure at Carlsbad Caverns, Bowles later said, "I saw everything happen in the cave but childbirth, and several times I was plenty worried that I'd see that too." Carlsbad Caverns National Park went on to grow and change, but much of its success today is due to the talents and energies of Tom Bowles, the Colonel.
El Capitan. The Guadalupe Mountains. Guidepost for early travelers. Massive sentinel of the Chihuahuan Desert. A 250 million years ago, when this part of the Earth's crust lay near the equator, the Guadalupe Mountains began as a reef on the edge of an ancient sea. The reef itself, a mighty mass hundreds of miles long, was buried in the geologic debris of succeeding ages. Eventually, in the infinitely slow churning of the Earth's crust, the long-buried reef once again came to the surface, this time to stand as a mountain range at the edge of a vast, dry landscape. Today, you can see the reef, not only as the Guadalupe Mountains, but also the Glass Mountains and the Apache Range. From a different perspective, the Guadalupes are like an island in the desert. The surrounding desert is low, dry, and vast, making it exceedingly difficult for man or beast to exist. Guadalupe Mountains National Park. Over 86,000 acres of wilderness, intercepting the winds, often of great velocity, seeking the clouds, attempting to drink the varying quantity of water they contain. At the top of the mountains, in a place called the Bowl, stands a forest of trees that you would expect to see hundreds of miles to the north. Birds, mammals, flowers, color, all gifts of the miracle of a little water. The Mescalero Apache and people before them knew this. They came to the Guadalupes to find food and shelter. When the Butterfield stage began coming through Guadalupe Pass in 1858, travelers knew the range as the lonely high spot midway on the cross-country route. At the ruins of the Pinery, a horse-changing station, you can almost recapture some of that frontier spirit. Soon settlers, although few in number but tough and self-reliant, came to this desert mountain range. The Frijole Ranch, one of the first established in this part of West Texas, brings back the spirit of those individuals through cultural and historical exhibits. Recognized for its many important features, Congress established Guadalupe Mountains National Park in October 1966. As a visitor to this island in the desert, you can stand high above the clouds with rasping breath and beads of sweat and feel the accomplishment of having climbed each foot of the way to the top of Texas.
Well, what brought us is the mountain. We wanted to climb that mountain. And now that we're here, we want to go through McKittrick Canyon and come on back through.
Here you can find a ponderosa pine forest, Douglas fir, big-tooth maple, limber pine, and even a few aspen, remnants of forests that covered this area thousands of years ago when the climate was cooler and wetter. The McKittrick Canyon Trail, cutting through the Capitan Reef, provides a rare opportunity to view geologic history as seen in a grand and majestic profile.
Like you get up on the other side, off the escarpment, there's evidence of copper mineralization, and you get off into the real rough country, and you get hematite pseudomorphous after pyrite. You know, it's the shape of pyrite crystals, but it's hematite. And I've never seen that before. It's kind of scary, and it's up there. It's really neat.
As you hike in the park, you can see the interlocking balance of plants and wildlife that makes Guadalupe Mountains National Park an ecological island.
Well, all these guys want to go, but the mountain was just too high for some of them. He's 6, and that's just too much for him. But Matt's 9, and he made it all right. He did real fine.
Like yesterday, I took off this trail here with the little ones here. You know, they get a little fussy.
Yeah.
But it was a real easy trail, the way they made it. You know, for little ones, just to go up to a certain point.
This is not a park you can rush through. Pause for a moment. Touch the folds of the land. Ponder the awesome forces that shaped this land. Take in the vistas. Think of the people here before you. Observe the little things. All the small details that comprise Guadalupe Mountains National Park.
The Guadalupe Mountains contain the best exposed fossil reef in the world, Capitan Reef. The history of Capitan Reef began millions of years ago as colliding continents formed uplifts and basins. 250 million years ago, near the convergence of several continents, the reef began to grow in shallow waters at the rim of the Delaware Basin. Marine organisms built the reef complex 400 miles long over 5 million years. Submerged sand channels were created by sediments carried in drainages called arroyos. Barrier islands also developed, while arroyos and vegetation inland continued to change. This computer simulation shows the growth of Capitan Reef beneath the water's surface. Periodically, the reef was exposed as sea level fluctuated. As the basin floor slowly sank, the reef grew upward towards the light. Behind the reef complex were shallow lagoons, tens of miles wide. As the waters evaporated, the basin filled with gypsum and salt. Sediments from the land buried the reef and seabed. Over millions of years, the continents drifted toward their present-day positions. Erosion from uplifting 10 to 12 million years ago revealed the ancient reef. The canyon is situated just south of the boundary line of New Mexico, is from 8 to 10 miles in length, and varies in width from 50 feet or less at the head north of Guadalupe Peak to half a mile or more near the mouth of the canyon, which opens to the east. On either side as you enter, the mountains rise almost perpendicularly to the height of 3,000 feet, and besides the great variety of pine, white oak, post oak, maple, ash, wild cherry, elm, hackberry, and manzanita abounds. Frost had set in, and the great variety of tints and hues of foliage, from dark green to pure carmine, added greatly to the life and beauty of the magnificent scenery. Colonel Benjamin Grierson, 10th U.S. Cavalry, 1878.
My name is Wallace E. Pratt. I was born on the Ides of March, 1885. In 1920, I went out to Pecos, Texas. That's on the Pecos River, about 100 miles southeast from McKittrick Canyon. I was looking for oil. We came to a weekend. Judge Drain said, if you wouldn't mind 100 miles over rough country with no roads, I'll show you the most beautiful spot in Texas. He took us to McKittrick Canyon, and I decided it was the most beautiful spot I had ever seen. I was in love with it right now. It was in the midst of a desert, arid country, cactus and desert plants. It was in the face of a great mountain range, Guadalupe Mountains. The canyon just sawed a cross-section through the front of that mountain range. That front is 40 miles long, extends from Carlsbad out to Guadalupe Peak. Stands up 3,000 feet above the surrounding terrain. Here's McKittrick Canyon, a cold, bold stream of water comes flowing out of that canyon. The moment it gets to the outlet of the front, walls rising on either side, it sinks. And you don't see a sign of that out on the desert. But in the canyon, it's a wonderful, bold stream of cold, clear water. The water cut that canyon. What makes it beautiful is that water is charged with calcium carbonate, lime. And as it flows and bubbles over these rocks and aerated thoroughly, it evaporates. And as it evaporates, it precipitates that lime. And that lime veneers all the bed of that stream. The gravel is inside, but it's covered with travertine, which is calcium carbonate coming out of solution. The travertine formed a dam across the whole width of that shallow, 20 feet wide stream, and dammed up with a travertine dam all the way across it. Now, it wasn't a linear wall, it was little arcs, making little dams, one after the others. There were those pools, dammed up by the travertine dam going to the shore on either side, and verdure coming right down to ferns. And in the middle of the desert, it's just inconceivably beautiful. The desert plants stop at the mouth of the canyon, and in the canyon you never guess it, maples. Maples. And if you go there in the autumn, the maples are beautiful reds and yellows and tremendous color. One of the most beautiful trees that lines the canyon is what the natives told us was manzanita, little apples. And it has a beautiful white blossom. It has waxy leaves that it holds through the winter. The blossom give a little red berry, which is the apple. We sent some of them up to the Forestry Bureau in Santa Fe. And they said, this is not manzanita, this is a madronia. And it's a rainforest tree. We built this stone cabin in 1930. We built that at the junction of North McKittrick and South McKittrick. That's about 2 miles up from the mouth of the canyon. A beautiful pool there at that time. What makes the canyon geologically important is the Capitan Barrier Reef. The shores of Central America are coral reefs. The Capitan Barrier Reef is formed of these reef-building creatures, but they're not corals. It formed in Permian time. In other words, it formed 245 to 250 million years ago. And it is formed of algae, not coral, algae, a grass-like, filamentous, kelp-like creature. In Permian times, a shallow inland sea extended from western Kansas continuously and widening a little bit down into Old Mexico. And the shores of that sea were muddy. So Barrier Reef, looking for a place to grow, the reef creatures, they moved out some places 30 miles from shore, and there they found a clean bottom, and they attached themselves to it and grew up. While they were growing up, the bottom was sinking. Finally, that reef got to be 1,800 to 2,000 feet high. The bottom sinking continuously for 20 million years. Finally, it stopped. At the end of the Permian, the crust of the earth was rising. The sea flowed off back into the ocean, so that the moment it began to rise, the reef died at the end of the Permian time. But its skeleton was there. Finally, it stood above sea level. McKittrick Canyon cuts a gash through Capitan Barrier Reef. I was fascinated with the beauty of McKittrick Canyon. And the geology, of course, fascinates me wherever I find it. McKittrick Canyon had the geology, and it also had a nice place to live.
The Pinery, stage stop on the Butterfield Overland Mail. The New York Times called it a swindle and squander of taxpayers' money when John Butterfield accepted a $600,000 contract to deliver the St. Louis mail to San Francisco in 25 days. Authorized by an act of Congress in March 1857, the contract was the largest ever given to date for land mail service. 18 months later, on September 28, 1858, the conductor of the first westbound Butterfield Overland Mail coach sounded his bugle to announce the coach's arrival at the Pinery station. After pausing for a change of horses, the westbound coach jolted slowly down the pass and passed the eastbound coach from San Francisco. The brief encounter was proof that the continent had been spanned and that John Butterfield's dream had become reality. Both coaches hurried on at about 5 miles an hour, averaging 120 miles a day around the clock. Pinery Station was named for nearby stands of pine. With abundant water from Pine Spring, it was one of the most favorably situated stations on the line's 2,800-mile route from St. Louis to San Francisco. Near 5,420-foot Guadalupe Pass, the Pinery was also the highest. Pinery Station was built of local limestone in a fortress-like pattern. High rock walls formed a rectangular enclosure with a single entrance. 3 mud-roofed rooms were attached in lean-to fashion to the inside walls, affording some measure of protection from Indian raids. The walls of limestone slabs and adobe were 30 inches thick and 11 feet high. The station's water supply came from Pine Spring through an open ditch to a tank inside the walls. A stockade of heavy pine posts protected the main entrance on the south, and in the southeast corner, a thatched shelter covered the wagon repair shop and smithy. Livestock was kept in the stone-walled corral on the north end. There was more activity at the Pinery Station than the twice-weekly stages from each direction. The station keeper was Henry Ramstein, a surveyor from El Paso. He supervised 6 to 8 men who worked as cooks, blacksmiths, and herders. Express riders dashed through at all hours, road crews stopped off, and tank wagons filled up at Pine Spring, rolling on to fill water tanks along the dry stretches. Freighters and pack trains added to the passing traffic. Butterfield coaches continued to stop at the Pinery for 11 months, until August 1859, when the Guadalupe Pass route was abandoned for a new road to the south by Forts Stockton and Davis along the Southern Military Road to El Paso. But long after its abandonment by the Butterfield Company, the Pinery Station continued to be a refuge for emigrants, freighters, soldiers, outlaws, and drovers. By the time a full schedule of coaches was traveling the route, Butterfield's company had spent $1 million, built 200 way stations, bought 1,800 head of mules and horses, had 250 shiny new coaches, and employed hundreds of men working day and night to get the mail to its destination. The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 brought an abrupt end to the Butterfield Overland Mail as federal troops stationed at forts along the route were recalled to the east and Southerners seized many of the stations. In March 1861, the Butterfield contract was canceled after 2 years, 5 months, and 17 days. More than 50 employees had been killed, hundreds of animals stolen, and many stations looted and burned. But as the forerunner of the Pony Express and ultimately the Transcontinental Railroad, the Butterfield stage line made a major contribution to the settlement of the West. Here at the Pinery Station, on a small section of this historic thoroughfare, a cavalcade of history has passed by this green oasis in the desert. Prehistoric tribesmen resting by Pine Spring and moving on in search of food. Spanish conquistadors and missionaries watering their horses. Mescalero Apaches roasting mescal in the shadow of the mountains. Mexican mule trains and creaking ox carts pioneering new trails to habitable lands along the Pecos River. American traders and settlers winding their way across the pass in canvas-topped wagons. Cavalry units en route to establish forts and survey new territory. And the shrill call of the conductor's bugle of the Butterfield Overland Mail Coach. Pinery Station has the distinction of being the only remaining Butterfield Station ruin standing near a major thoroughfare, only 200 yards off US 62-180, which generally follows the original Butterfield route through Guadalupe Pass. The ruin is preserved by the National Park Service as a window to the past, in the relatively unchanged setting that stage riders and Mescalero Apaches saw more than 100 years ago. The old Pine Spring has witnessed human wanderings for more than 5 centuries, and the Pinery Station saw the start of a transportation network that now connects the world in less time than it took the bumpy mail coach to travel from the Pinery to El Paso. It is good to stand in the shadow of the Guadalupes and remember those who have come before us. Frijole Ranch, pioneer legacy of the Guadalupes. The Frijole Ranch area has been occupied for many centuries, undoubtedly due to the fact that there are 6 springs within a 3-mile radius of the site. Mescal pits, petroglyphs, and artifacts discovered in nearby caves tell of early Native American inhabitants and their dependency on the essential water, vegetation, cover, and game found in the vicinity. Later, Mescalero Apaches lived throughout the Guadalupe Mountains, and the areas around Frijole Ranch and McKittrick Canyon were favorite rancheria sites. Unfortunately, the Guadalupes were frequently the scene of conflict between the Mescaleros and the U.S. Army. One such encounter occurred in December of 1869, when a 3rd Cavalry Army detachment under the command of Lieutenant Howard Bass Cushing attacked several Mescalero Apache rancherias along the eastern edge of the Guadalupe escarpment. One site may have been located just north of Frijole Ranch and Manzanita Spring, although Spencer carbine rounds found near the mouth of McKittrick Canyon suggest that it could also have been in that location. Although not well substantiated, some sources believe that a 4-room dugout built by the Walcott family in the early 1860s, prior to the Cushing raid, was the earliest Anglo dwelling near the ranch. The first permanent structure on the ranch was built by the Raider brothers in 1876. These 2 bachelors operated a small cattle ranch out of their sturdy rock home, which consisted only of the present front 2 rooms of the ranch house. The double-walled house, with mud plastered between 2 layers of stone, was constructed 40 feet from Frijole Spring, and the brothers became the first permanent settlers on the eastern side of the Guadalupes. The Raiders never filed for a deed to the land, and apparently moved on by the late 1800s. In 1906, John Thomas Smith did file for a deed on the Frijole Ranch site, referring to the stone house and property as the Spring Hill Ranch. Smith had moved from Wisconsin to Texas, where in 1889 he married Nelia Mae Carr of Sherman. Eventually they moved to Van Horn, Texas, and from there acquired the Frijole site. The Smiths made a living by truck farming and had an orchard and garden east and north of the house. The springs provided adequate water for growing fruits and vegetables and for raising cattle, horses, pigs, and chickens. Produce was taken to market in Van Horn, 65 miles to the south. The Smiths greatly expanded the ranch house in the 1920s with the addition of a rear kitchen and 2 bedrooms, as well as a 2nd story and dormers. The building on the northeast corner of the lot was first erected as a bunkhouse for hired help, but was later used as a guest house. The red schoolhouse was built with vertical wood siding and a pitched roof covered with corrugated tin. Up to 8 children from the Smith family and local ranches once attended school there. The Smiths provided room, board, and a horse in addition to a $30 per month salary for the teacher. For several decades, Frijole Ranch also served as a community center for dances and other social gatherings. It was the region's official post office from 1916 to 1942. In 1942, after 36 years of ranching and farming, John Smith sold Frijole Ranch to Judge J.C. Hunter for $5,000 and moved his family to Hawley, Texas, near Abilene. Jesse Coleman Hunter first moved to Van Horn, Texas in 1911 to serve as superintendent of schools. He later became a director and vice president of the Van Horn State Bank, a Culberson County judge and treasurer, and a successful oil and gas wildcatter and rancher. Judge Hunter began buying land in the Guadalupe Mountains in 1923. By the 1940s, after purchasing Frijole Ranch, he owned some 43,000 acres. His Guadalupe Mountains ranch concentrated on raising Angora goats, sheep, cattle, and horses. At one time, 22 tons of mohair wool were produced annually by 4,000 Angora goats. The mountain high country was utilized as a summer range for livestock, and water was pumped from lowland springs to metal storage tanks in the hills. The Frijole Ranch House served as ranch headquarters for J.C. Hunter's foreman, Noel Kincaid, and his family from 1942 until 1969. J.C. Hunter was an early conservationist, and in 1925 he initiated the first attempt to make the region a park. The idea failed to gain momentum, but because Hunter continued to hope for a park in the future, he limited hunting on the ranch and grazing in McKittrick Canyon. Under his stewardship, elk, turkey, and rainbow trout were returned or introduced to the Guadalupe Mountains ecosystem. When Judge Hunter died in 1945, his son, J.C. Hunter, Jr., inherited the Guadalupe Mountains Ranch. Although he was mayor of Abilene and a successful oil man, the younger Hunter took an active interest in his lands in the Guadalupes, and by the 1960s had purchased an additional 24,312 acres. In 1966, J.C. Hunter, Jr. fulfilled his father's dream and sold the 67,312-acre Guadalupe Mountains Ranch to the National Park Service for $1.5 million, about $22 per acre. From 1969 to 1980, the Frijole Ranch House served as a ranger residence. Then, for 3 years, the buildings underwent rehabilitation and renovation before being used as an operations office for the Visitor Protection and Resource Management staff from 1983 until 1991. In 1992, the Frijole Ranch House was again renovated and finally opened to the public as a cultural museum, reflecting the early ranching era and the post-Civil War economy that opened the region to settlement. Today, Frijole Ranch houses the park's Cultural History Museum and is on the National Register of Historic Sites. The ranch is the access point for the Smith Spring Loop Trail to Smith Spring, which was named for the Smith family. The National Park Service will continue to preserve the Frijole Ranch so that future generations may come to appreciate our diverse heritage.
Guadalupe Mountains National Park is first and foremost a hiker's park. More than 80 miles of hiking trails lace the park, from leisurely strolls around Frijole Ranch to multi-day backpacks deep in the rugged western reaches. Please remember that all of Guadalupe's trails are desert hikes. Make certain that you have plenty of water and proper equipment. Temperatures can vary dramatically between the Pine Springs trailhead at 5,800 feet and the 8,749-foot summit of Guadalupe Peak. Afternoon thunderstorms and high winds are to be expected, particularly in spring and early summer. The trail maps reproduced in this program are from Trails Illustrated's Guadalupe Mountains National Park map, which should be carried on all of the longer hikes. The estimated times given here are only that, estimates. You should take into account your abilities and those of your party members when planning a hike. The complete guide to hiking in the Guadalupe Mountains is Bill Schneider's The Trail Guide to Carlsbad Caverns and Guadalupe Mountains National Parks. It is available in both visitor centers. The Park Service also maintains a list of suggested day hikes, as well as a comprehensive trail catalog. Please help us preserve this special place by staying on established trails and respecting the wildlife you encounter. Hike with care and common sense, and walk in harmony with the land as you enjoy the grandeur of one of America's best-kept secrets, the Guadalupe Mountains. Carlsbad Caverns National Park is located in the state of New Mexico. Carlsbad Caverns National Park, the Mexican free-tailed bats which inhabit Carlsbad Cavern are Carlsbad Cavern was formed out of stalactites, stalagmite, I am a small desert creature that spends the hot day deep in my burrow. At night, I come out to forage for seeds. I never drink water because I make all the moisture I need from my food. I hop very high when I'm trying to escape from an enemy, and that is how I got my name. The substance which decomposed the limestone to form
One of the most frequently asked questions at Carlsbad Caverns National Park is, what time do the bats fly? It's a question that can't be answered with any ranger-like precision because the Mexican free-tailed bats fly from the cave whenever they are ready to leave and not a minute before. Every evening about sunset, during the months of May through October, the bat colony spirals into the sky on its nightly foraging flight. The rangers base the bat flight talk schedule on the start time of the previous night's flight, setting the program at least 30 minutes before the exit time of the previous night. The program is free and usually well attended, with crowds of 1,000 not uncommon. If you're visiting the park, check with rangers at the information desk for the next bat flight time. If you're enjoying the experience from your computer screen, here's one of nature's greatest shows.